How's it going, you guys? In this video, we're going to be looking at completing the square. Completing the square. But first, I want to just remind you guys of how we can solve some types of equations. So the first one I want to look at is right here, x squared equals 16. Well, just remember, we're trying to get x by itself, so you could move over the 16 and you could factor this. But something easier that we can do is we can just take the square root of both sides, if you guys remember from Algebra 1. So we would have x equals plus or minus 4. That would be our solution. It's actually two solutions. It was b, x is 4, and x is also negative 4. I don't care how you write that. You can write it like that. That's probably how you'll see me write it. Just don't forget, when you take the square root, you have to put the plus or minus, because we don't know whether 4 squared was 16 or negative 4 squared was 16. Either way will give us 16. Similarly, looking at x squared minus 25, don't look at that one yet.
It's not ready yet.
So if we add the 25 over, you could also factor, but say we add the 25 over, so this x squared equals 25, then we can take the square root of both sides, so x would be plus or minus 5. Yay. So super easy. If we can just get a squared by itself, then we can take the square root of both sides. As long as, notice, we don't have a variable in this other side, it's just taking the square root of a number. So same idea here. If we can do this, we would have minus 18 to get these together. So x squared equals 1. Take the square root, so x is plus or minus 1. Square root of 1 is 1. Always and forever. One like this. So this says solve. Notice here, we have a 16. We could subtract that 16 to the other side, and it would be negative 17. Or sorry, negative 8. Negative 7. I can't do math. But what we could also do is we could factor this such that it is x plus 3 times x plus 3 equals 16, which is the same thing as x plus 3 squared equals 16, which, whoa, we have something squared equals a number. So I got to something squared equals a number, so I can take the square root of both sides so that I have x plus 3 is plus or minus 4. And then I can subtract that 3 to the other side so that I get the solutions of 3 plus 4 and 3 minus 4, because I need to do 3 plus 4, so I'll get 7. And 3 minus 4 would be negative 1. Those would be the two solutions I'm looking for there. So notice, it was super easy when we were able to do something like that, when we were able to say that this is x plus 3 squared. This is called a perfect square because we were able to factor it, and it is the same thing squared. That times that is that squared, perfect square, just like a square. If we have a square with side 8, the area would be 8 squared. 64 is a perfect square number. Alright, so looking on, same idea. If I take this and I can factor this as x plus 1 squared is 25, then I can take the square root of both sides. So I have x plus 1 is plus or minus 5. Subtract the 1, so I have negative 1 plus or minus 5. And then I can do negative 1 plus 5 would give me a solution of 4. And negative 1 minus 5 would give me a solution of negative 6. And keep going. You guys are doing good. Make sure that you guys are pausing, rewinding the video. I know I'm going super fast, but remember, you can pause it. This is a video. You don't have to. I don't know what I was trying to say. But pause it, rewind it, ask me questions. That's what I'm here for. Is just help you guys learn. Here, notice we can factor out a 2 out of everything first. So if you factor out a 2, we'd have x squared minus 25 equals 0. And then I can get rid of this 2 by actually dividing both sides by 2. 2 divided by 2 and 0 divided by 2, so I get x squared minus 25 equals 0. Hey-oh, just like the other ones, we can move the 25 to the other side, so x squared equals 25. And then I can take the square root of both sides, so x is plus or minus 5. No other numbers to add or anything like that. Alright, so now this actually like completing the square part. We haven't talked about what completing the square is. A perfect square factor is something times itself squared, such that if I were to multiply this out, I would get something like that. Well, notice the number inside is half of 6, and it is that number. How do I say this? 3 is half of 6. 3 squared is also 9. So we can do the same sort of idea. If I want to make this right now, this would factor as x times x plus 10. it does not factor into the same thing times itself squared. So we need to add a number to it. Well, if we know it's half of this number here, right there, there's 10. Half of 10 is 5. What goes out here is 5 squared, so 25, such that this will now factor as x plus 5 squared. So looking at something like these, completing the square, just finding what we're adding or subtracting to this such that we would have a perfect square factoring problem. Half of 8 is 4. 4 squared is 16. Half of 16 is 8. 8 squared is 64. Half of 4 squared is 2. 2 squared is 4. Half of 6 is 3. 3 squared is 9. Okay, that's it. Really, just notice this only works when we get into an instance where we have 1x squared in all of these. If we have something else in front of that, we'll have to do something else. We'll encounter that later, though. So now, using completing the square to solve. So you could factor this if they factored. This one, I don't think it does. No, it doesn't look like it does. But what we can do is if I move this 12 to the other side, and I complete the square, so say I complete the square on this side, half of 6 is 3, 3 squared is 9. Well, notice I added 9 to this entire side, so if I add 9 to that side, that way I'm adding 9 to both sides, is keeping the equation equal to itself. So really our goal in this, our goal was to try to get something like what we were getting here. So notice when I had a squared term, I could just take the square root of both sides and we could use our solutions. I had a squared term, we could take the square root of both sides and add or subtract to get the solutions. So same idea, this helps us in solving, especially when the numbers aren't very nice. So I can now factor this side as x minus 3 squared equals 21. Take the square root, plus or minus whenever you take the square root. So we have x minus 3 is plus or minus the square root of 21. Just need to move over that 3, so x is 3 plus or minus the square root of 21. That is perfectly acceptable as an answer. So we'll do the same idea here. X squared minus 12x equals negative 20. So I need to add some number to both sides such that I can have a perfect square factor. Well, half of 12 is 6. 6 squared is 36, so I add 36 to both sides. So that means this will factor as x minus 6 squared, and it equals negative 20 and 36 is 16. Take the square root of both sides, so x minus 6 is plus or minus 4. Add 6, so 6 plus or minus 4. If it's numbers like this, though, you can actually combine these like we were doing on the front page. So if you do 6 plus 4, x equals 10. 6 minus 4 is 2. So we have 10 and 2 as our solutions. All right. Get some good practice on your homework. Please, 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 a million times. Come ask me questions. That's what I'm here for, before school, after school, during your blended period, anytime. All right. I'll see y'all soon. Bye-bye.